prepared such a nice PowerPoint presentation, but due to technical problems, I have to go back to a more classic fashion of presentation, so yeah. And I changed the title maybe slightly. I will talk about transliminal experiences, and therefore comparing religious and pathological context with respect to transliminal experiences. Let me start with some preliminary remarks. Between the experience of the unio mystica and partial consciousness implications of psychosis in the category of schizophrenia, there are, according to my first thesis, no differences to be found. The most characteristic common intersection is an ecstatic visionary state, which varies in its interpretations. The metaphysical interpretation, a spiritual soul reunion with God, as we find it, for example, in Bernard of Clairvaux, is usually taken seriously, at least by certain theologians. However, if a comparable interpretation of people diagnosed with schizophrenia is put forward, for example by Husserl, it is usually rejected by psychiatrists. The reason for this is that a sudden interest in religious topics is regarded as belonging to the prodromal phase of psychosis. But if my thesis is correct, does this mean that the mystical experience is pathological? Is as pathological as the experience of people diagnosed with schizophrenia? Or is it just the other way around? Is it a non-pathological experience in both cases? Karl Jasper stated in this connection lapidary, quote, "Religious experience remains what it is, whether it is carried out by a sick or a mentally ill person, or whether the person is experiencing is both in one," end of quote. Comparably, recent findings of psychotherapy research suggest that we speak of experiences realized by a transliminal human consciousness, I borrow this term from Isabel Clarke, which are contextually differently situated, but at a phenomenal level, partially indistinguishable. To understand key terms used, in reference to Husserl, I understand experience in terms of Erlebnis psychoepistemologically. This means as an interaction of intentional acts of an I and its ichlichen, egoitical, and ich-fremden, non-egoitical impressions. Talking about a phenomenon, we have to distinguish between its noetical implications, how is something experienced, and its noematical implications, what is experienced. The methodological consequence of this understanding is an introspective approach, respectively a phenomenological analysis and reflection of first-person reports. With the terms religiosity and spirituality used synonymously here, I refer to the ability of human beings to update, in terms of German aktualisieren, their transliminal consciousness. Experience reports from people diagnosed with schizophrenia point to another circumstance, the often polar character of transliminal consciousness. William James commented on this, quote, "Religious mysticism is only one half of mysticism. The other half has no accumulated traditions except which the textbooks on insanity supply. Open any of these, and you will find abundant cases in which mystical ideas are cited as characteristic symptoms of enfeebled or deluded states of mind." End of quote. In this respect, findings from recent psychotherapy research show that religiosity should not, as Freud assumed, be regarded exclusively as a pathogenic factor, but also as a salutogenic factor. Basically, the development curve and therapy of remissionable psychosis in the category of schizophrenia is a multifactorial event that can only be sufficiently understood with the help of a psychodynamic perspective. The following comparison between religious and pathological transliminal experiences, therefore, considers both a phenomenological and a psychodynamic analytical perspective. My second thesis is that the latter can very well be used to find significant differences. To examine these theses, I proceed as follows. First, the phenomenal character of two exemplary reports on transliminal experiences will be examined, taking into account their noetic and normatic implications. The first comes from a religious, here mystical, the second from a pathological context, here the experience of psychosis in the category of schizophrenia. Secondly, the psychodynamics of transliminal experiences are considered. Third, The results will be explained, especially by the help of Gerda Walter's structural model of human consciousness on the one hand, and reflected in the light of contemporary theory formation on the other. Walter, a student of Husserl and Fender, was philosophically engaged with social phenomenology and the phenomenology of religion, as well as with psychopathological phenomena. And among other merits, she contributed the extant subject index to Husserl's Ideas 1 and gave the opening lecture for the inaugural meeting of the Freiburger Phänomenologische Gesellschaft in winter semester 1918-19, entitled The Problematik von Husserls reinem Ich, which would be like problematizer on problems of Husserl's pure I, which has unfortunately been lost. While this main work, The Phenomenology of Mysticism, which came out in 1923, and her article, The Inner Psychological Structure of Schizophrenia, published in 1992-7, serve as reference points. Fourthly, I conclude with the consideration of the significance of the results for the philosophy of consciousness or mind. At the same time, I include both Walter's reflections and those of Walter Custos, a contemporary Dutch philosopher with experience of psychosis from his Philosophie van der Wahnsinn, Philosophy of Madness, which came out in 2011. Point one, quote. As I was thinking, however suddenly, something was streaming towards me from a vast infinite distance, something that permeated me with a feeling of deepest safety and security. All the suffering I had ever experienced was as if it had never been. I felt completely reborn and transformed. I no longer knew anything about myself and my surroundings. I only felt that one flood of love that had absorbed me, looked only at that spiritual light that had permeated me. With these words, Walter describes in her autobiography a personal experience from the war winter of 1918, which she retrospectively classifies as a mystical experience, and rightly so, since the phenomenological comparison with reports by mystics from diverse time and cultures reveals common intersections. In Mechthild von Magdeburg's The Flowing Light of Divinity, for example, almost identical formulations can be found as in the report of Walter, which was an atheist at the time. I think it's worthwhile to mention. The second report, published in the summer of 1979, half a century different, by the psychologist Peter Chadwick on transliminal experience in the context of an incipient psychosis and the category of schizophrenia, the author says, quote, "It was as if a portal opened, and I was overwhelmed by a positive, euphoric, spiritual experience. It was like being an empty vessel being filled with the divine light of God. The tortuous agonies of my past were forgotten. I was as if reborn with a new self-perception and a new purpose to bring God in the world." On a phenomenal level, the similarity of the experiences is striking. This applies first of all to the noetic implications. These are highly delighting, at the same time holding and transformative, and allow all personal impulses to recede into the background. And for its noetic implications, a spiritual presence of light and love is experienced. With the help of Walter's structural model of consciousness, the events can be analyzed more precisely. She regards, similar to Edith Stein by the way, as psychophysical spiritual beings, and differentiates as follows. First, she sees an ego center, which functions as a steering center for conscious perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. This is intentional and self-aware, enables all formal, intellectual, and deliberate acts, thus corresponding to Husserl's pure I. Second, she has the idea of an embedded self. This functions as a memory, which contains, so to speak, the data of all objective, subjective, and intersubjective bodily mental experience. Its actualization takes place through the ego center and the basic essence. With the idea of the embedded self, Walter continues the thoughts of Fender. Third, she has the notion of the basic essence. This enables more complex mental processes, such as moral judgments, but it's also spiritual, i.e. transrational cognitive formation, and which is, for Walter, it is possible through the connection, not incongruence of being, with the to get any connection, not incongruence, with the primordial source of divinity, understood as living spirit. The three components intermingle. It's comparable to Merleau-Ponty's notion of intertwinement. With parts of Plato's and Aristotle's understanding of the soul, Walter classifies the ego center additionally as standing above the embedded self somehow, and emphasizes in her idea of an exhaustibility of the ego center, its dependence on the basic essence as a motor for the development of human beings in terms of Aristotle's principle of entelegy. Using Walter's terminology, we can identify the following in her own report. A. We find a de-actualization of data in the embedded self. B. We find a decoupling of the ego center from the self. C. We find a coupling of the ego center with the basic essence. D. We find an actualization of the connection of the basic essence with the primordial source of divinity. Translated into the terminology of psychophilosophical consciousness research, it can be said there is a deactivation of bodily mediated personal consciousness implications going on here, while maintaining the pure ego consciousness, as well as the transpersonal expansion of consciousness, which can also be understood as an experience of an encounter between the liminal consciousness of man and an absolute spirit, depending on which epistemological and ontological point of view is taken. More on this under my last report. Chadwick's experience report shows the same characteristic as Walter's. In other words, on a phenomenal level, there are no differences between religious and pathological liminal experiences. The situation is different if we integrate the processuality of the transliminal experience into the comparison. In Walter's case, a profound psychophysical spiritual exhaustion as a result of overwork, hunger, and grief precedes her transliminal experience. Quote, all my mental, spiritual, and physical powers were used up. I felt like a completely burned down candle. This manifests itself through dissociation of the otherwise intersected physical, mental, and spiritual reference levels of self-perception. Everything that surrounded me became strangely distant and indifferent to me. Sometimes I was filled with a strange inner tension, as if I had to hold myself together with all my strength in order not to fall apart, as if I could no longer hold my thoughts. When this state, fluctuating between dissociation and derealization, becomes more acute, quote, it was as if I was sinking inwardly into a dark, endless depth in which there was no hold or light anywhere. At the same time, it seemed to me that I was moving away more and more from everything I had loved and valued. An intensification that, according to Walter, would have resulted in madness if something had not been found that, quote, gave everything a higher final meaning. But before this happens, Walter's ego consciousness is drawn into a kind of tunnel, quote. I felt how I was sinking and sank without knowing where I was going, as if I was plunging through empty, infinite, starless space. Decoupled from the self, the ego center is nevertheless able to remain with itself. Quote, it was necessary to remain self-aware and experience a new hold from the basic essence or the primordial source of divinity. Quote. Something was streaming towards me from vast infinite distance, something that permeated me with a feeling of deepest safety and security. The experience, recalling the dark night of the soul, mystics like John of the Cross talk about, changes Walter's professional and personal existence fundamentally. From now on, she is not only predominantly engaged with broader phenomena, observes and trains her own spirituality, but the former atheist is also, like so many members of the early phenomenological movement, this is very interesting, baptized according to Masonic creeds. However, she is anything but alien to the world and detached from it. Rather, she shows a parity mixture of vita activa and vita contemplativa. Retrospectively, Walter classifies the experience not only as a mystical experience, but also recognizes that she has gone the mystical path of training beforehand without knowing it. For instance, she has learned through strokes of fate not to adhere to material things and of persons, and was, as a trained phenomenologist, capable of a controlled flexibility of mind structures. As a trigger for the transliminal experience, she blames a brief disconnection of her ego center from the embedded self as a result of her exhaustion at the time, and emphasizes that the ego center succeeds in establishing a connection with the basic essence or the primordial source of divinity. Also, Walter states that her psychophysical spiritual organism is energized by what she has experienced. Edith Stein is witnessing something similar. In other words, Walter's transliminal experience contributes significantly to strengthening her personal and professional identity. Chadwick's case is different. There is something comparable, such as the occurrence of a psychic crisis immediately before his transliminal experience. Quote, in 1979, I felt battered by the hatred and gossip of the world. In the summer, having resigned a university lecturing post in psychology, because of increasing paranoia, I hit the base of my fortunes. Living in a bedsitter in Hackney, I was essentially alone, penniless, unemployed, felt scorned, hated, with no future now and a horrific past. It was as if and a horrific past. It's one sentence. And now, after the comma, it was as if a portal opened and I was overwhelmed by a positive, euphoric spiritual experience. But Chadwick's crisis is more pronounced than Walter's, or results from years of psychic instability. More precisely, the psychologist points to a poorly developed self-esteem or weakness of the self, which has resulted from the devaluation of his personal orientation through his parents' house and environment. The time at which psychosis sets in is marked by the culmination of his self-doubt and the loss of all material and professional security. Also, feelings of hatred against his tormentors became noticeable, but are kept in check by paranoia. Unlike Walter, Chadwick's transliminal experience does not lead him directly to a strengthening of his identity. Instead, the psychic instability that favors transliminal experience leads to the formation of an insane system in which Chadwick interprets what he has experienced self-increasingly as a being chosen by God, but in the further course of psychosis translates this interpretation into the self-loathing assumption that he was personally commissioned by the Prince of Heaven. He describes the turnaround as follows, quote, in this state of mind, what previously had been mystical thoughts as such, all is meaning, now became psychotic thoughts, such as everything means something, even street signs, advertisements, etc. What previously had been the cosmos is an interconnected unity, now became everyone and everything is against me. From the acute psychosis in which he throws himself obeying voices in front of the bus, Chadwick helps psychotropic drugs. But he succeeds in averting a relapse by banishing the demonic forces, i.e. self-loathing impulses, with the help of the divine forces, i.e. self-respecting impulses, experienced in the prodromal stage. Only after the residual phase does Chadwick begin to integrate the insights into transliminal experiences, generated in the course of psychosis. In particular, the therapeutic effect of enslavement its positive implications into his personal and professional activities. It should be noted that in both cases, the transliminal experience was preceded by a psychic crisis. Walter not only masters this faster than Chadwick due to higher ego stability or, more modern, stronger resilience, but also uses the forces released in the process directly to further consolidate her personality. Chadwick is initially at the mercy of the dynamics of the crisis, which include actualizations of his liminal consciousness. Only when he specifically falls back on the spiritual resources, i.e. coupling ego center and basic essence, and combines these with psychotherapeutic procedures that strengthen his self-image, in other words, balancing ego center, self, and basic essence, does he succeed in strengthening his ego, a state that remains endangered due to his vulnerable psyche. The events can be better understood with Walter's reflections on the internal psychic structure of schizophrenia. We come to the subject. Walter blames, in the manner of Bleuler, famous psychiatrist to the time, a disturbance of the ego center for the development of symptoms that belong to the schizophrenic clinical picture. This can primarily manifest itself in two ways. First, the connection to the self is cut off. Typical symptoms are perception and affect disorders. This means that the ego center is no longer able to update perception and feelings from the embedded self. On the other hand, it has lost its filter function. In this case, feelings and thoughts flow disorderly into consciousness. Typical symptoms are losing of associations, withdrawal of thoughts, spreading of thoughts. As a side effect of this decoupling of self and ego center, Walter sees the possibility of an increased perceptiveness with regard to the basic essence, or its connection to the primordial source of divinity, with which she en passant explains the emergence of religious interest in the prodromal stage of schizophrenia. If the ego center is not intact, Walter continues, even the context of consciousness associated with the basic essence cannot be coherently updated or brought into equilibrium with impulses from the embedded self. The result is the formation of delusional systems, especially of religious kind. Walter presents an explanation worth considering for the hearing of voices so typical in the context of schizophrenic experience. In reference to Pfänder's idea of the Nebenwirklichkeit, what would be translated not so good as side reality, i.e. the constant, inwardly turned self-awareness of the I, she proposes to read voice hearing as an independence of the side reality, that is, as fractals of the ego. Symptoms of this is the commenting the thought sounding in the style of now he puts down the knife, or now she goes out of the room, etc. People diagnosed with schizophrenia often report this kind of hearing thoughts. According to Walter, those who transport negative, i.e. insulting and contemptuous contents, in the style of now the son of a bitch puts down the knife, or now the piece of dirt leaves the room, are a special way of playing with the sound of thoughts or hearing voices. Although she names a probable structural mechanism, it is a matter of data from the embedded self that, quote, would not cross the threshold of consciousness in the normal life of the soul through a kind of pre-control of the I. End of quote. She does not draw the obvious consequence that the structural scheme of ego center, self and basic essence emphasizes too much on conscious and unconscious in terms of actualization versus latency, implications of the life of the soul, without considering the area of a productive subconscious in the Freudian sense. The therapeutic necessity to introduce psychoanalytic procedures into the treatment of schizophrenia was, at least the last sentence of the article indicates, conscious intent, but not the necessity to incorporate the subconscious into her scheme of consciousness. Nevertheless, Chadwick's case can be coherently explained by Walter's structural considerations. Chadwick's ego center does not update data in the embedded self sufficiently or at all. The decoupling from the self makes room for data from the basic essence and enables the encounter with the primordial source of divinity. Since the ego center is impaired in its function and is not therapeutically counteracted, the further updates of data from the basic essence or the primordial source of divinity are not coherent. The formation of an insane system is the case. In the further unfolding of the process, the sounds of thought or hearing voices are added, which on the one hand are characterized by splitting off in the ego center, fractals of side reality, of previously suppressed experience context, as far as the psychoanalytic supplementation is concerned here. The psychotic decay is halted by the fact that the ego center is covered with the basic essence, and this coupling is placed in the service of an equally weighted relationship between the ego center, the self, and the basic essence. Before I come to my fourth and last point, which would be kind of short, I would like to answer the question posed at the beginning. No, mystical experiences are not pathological. The same applies to experiences in an unfolding psychosis, where we find similar noetical and non-medical implications. In both cases, transliminal consciousness comes into play. If, however, as in Chadwick's case, there is a psyche with an impaired ego center that experiences this dissolution of boundaries, and if this psyche does not succeed in further progressing in therapeutically absorbing this impairment, the transliminal experience can be integrated into the delusional system, which functions as compensation for the conflicts underlying the psychotic disintegration. In this case, and only in this case, are we allowed to speak of pathological experiences. But what do the insights gained mean for the philosophy of consciousness and mind? What does this mean for psychopathology and therapy should have become clear through my explanations. If we take seriously the reports of mystics and those of people with a schizophrenia diagnosis who talk about transliminal experiences, we have two possibilities. On the one hand, we can understand the experiences in question as experience immanent in consciousness only. In other words, as experiences of a transrational human consciousness. On the other hand, we can understand the experiences in question as an experience of an encounter with a meta-conscious or absolute spiritual dimension of being, which is classically referred to with terms like God or the divine, but to which this view cannot be reduced. Such a reading, I'd like to add, must not necessarily be a metaphysical one. It could also be understood as something as meta-conscious realism or the like. I think quantum physics might add some helpful insights on this issue. Walter advocates such a view, pointing out that not only the noetical implications of mystic experience indicate a genuity, i.e. are not present in any other human experiences, but that also the nometic implication makes a realization of an absolute spiritual being beyond human consciousness imperative. Also, Kustersplatz in his philosophy of madness, albeit not with the phenomenological precision of Gerda Walter, for such an interpretation of transliminal experiences witnessed in the context of psychosis. To this may be added, no lesser than Edmund Husserl feeds this view when he writes in Ideas 1 that the knowledge of a transcendent God would only be possible in the sense of an absoluteness. An absoluteness, quote, which is fundamentally different from the absoluteness of consciousness. And sure, if such would be the case, we had to analyze and reflect phenomenologically if and how human consciousness is affected by the absolute spirit. Husserl avoided this in the end by only bracketing the idea of an absolute spirit without considering its mandatory or not mandatory reintegration further in the ongoing phenomenological process. In her Phenomenology of Mysticism, Walter undertakes this endeavor and comes to the conclusion that there is, in addition to the natural, mundane, and conscious world, accessible for the reflecting eye via its body and mind, another source, an absolute spirit, accessible for the reflecting eye via its body, mind, and spiritual soul. And that is exactly what phenomenological analysis and reflection of reports on transliminal experiences from people diagnosed with schizophrenia show. Thanks for paying attention.